Hello there, and welcome to the value of everything. So, Bitcoin, it is surging at the moment. Very interesting times. I recommend a very good website, blockchain.info /charts /market price. It is an incredible thing to look at. It's a really good, beautiful chart that's created from there. When you look at that chart, you'll notice that we've reached a range of $371 by one Bitcoin, and that pretty much puts us back to early December of 2014. Actually mid-December of 2014, which is pretty much a full rebound of an incredible sort of trough that Bitcoin was in for a long time now, for almost coming up for a year. But the pendulum swing has gone fully up in the other direction. So to anybody who's not quite aware of what Bitcoin is, just one quick example I'll give you is if you look at some money in your wallet. So if you look at more so a note, work out how much that's worth. So if it's a piece of paper, it's not going to be really much worth there. And if it's a piece of plastic, it's really not too much either. Now, what you should really do at that point is ask yourself, why is that piece of paper or that piece of plastic expensive or is something of value? And the main reason is that when I go down to a shop, the police or the government's police force or military demands that this is legal tender so that I can make purchases with this note. And so therefore they have demonstrated with the power of force that this is worth something. This is worth $10. Whereas with a Bitcoin, it doesn't have the power of a state or guns or weaponry to demand that it's worth legal tender. It is only protected by the power of cryptography, which is basically a very, say if you had an extremely long number to crack, you've got to try and crack that. So really in the power of numbers itself, Bitcoin is protected from any kind of hacking or playing around. And everyone thinks, oh well, everyone's capable of hacking everything nowadays. It is very sophisticated in terms of the fact that it is run on a peer-to-peer network, which is basically how you run your like torrent downloading of movies. Everybody's got an individual download of the blockchain, which is every single accounting transaction that's ever been made on the blockchain itself, and they all independently run with each other. And then they continuously check to see that everything is working exactly the same way. So everybody's accounting ledger is exactly the same way, which is all historic. And if you try to tamper with yours to say that you've got 1 billion Bitcoins, which I don't think there is even 1 billion Bitcoins anyway, the rest of the blockchains would come together and say, hey, this one's not right, we need to correct this one, and send a message back to say you need to return back to your original accounting ledger or to match ours because you are an incorrect node on the chain. So that's just a brief rundown of Bitcoin and the power of its value. So it's interesting in those terms. Obviously, there are incredibly valuable things which are exchangeable for money as well, which is like your gold and silver. However, it's not very good at being divisible, so breaking it down into smaller units. I can't really buy a loaf of bread with a bar of gold. It's very complicated in those terms. However, I could very easily, there is all the systems and mechanics in the Bitcoin blockchain for me to go down to the shops and buy a loaf of bread. Obviously the merchant would have to be accepting the Bitcoins, but beyond that it's not really too far-fetched. So there we have Bitcoin's value in a little bit of a nutshell, and a reason why that is surging in price. Now, obviously, there is certain backdrops which may be occurring and obviously point towards the price surge in itself. We have a lot of market issues. We have China, which is basically set up to be a massive industrial nation which produces loads of toys for, say, the West or America. And basically, America has been piling on tons and tons of credit or debt onto their personal banks through mortgages or personal debts and everything else, or student loan debts, and they really haven't got the money to buy all these toys and gadgets. So we have this incredible losing game where China really hasn't got the correct economy calibrated for the environment that it's in. Sorry about that message. And therefore, they're in this kind of sinking situation. They're actually also, because they're so cash rich, they are actually purchasing America's government bonds as well. I think they're trying to restrict that somewhat, but it's still a major problem from their aspect. And then from the American side, they have got a fairly interesting number of markets, particularly Silicon Valley and industries, especially high-tech industries, which they have got a few good things going for them as well, but their economy is in decline. There isn't really any people there which have got immense amounts of value. There has been a number of wealth extractions which have occurred when the banks have been declared pretty much bankrupt. The taxpayers have been paying them off. Then the taxes have been rising against them. They are the shining beacon of a free market state. However, the claw of the massive government has got itself round the neck of the free world, and it is closing it down. And basically, that's in some kind of stagflation environment. And then all the other economies around the world, if you you got these two major players, you've got a Europe which is in sort of the same disease as America as well, and they haven't really their focus of their economy isn't necessarily about creating things of value that really improve the living standards, give us more hours in our day to do other things, give ourselves labor-saving devices, produce more with less energy. The real market environment has gone down to a world of materialism and instant gratification, and less so in the realms of us being really great entrepreneurs and inventors who really want to produce something that changes the world. There's a few of those people around there, but we're really stuck in an environment of the corporation which is shielded from any kind of ownership of responsibility, so therefore they can pay off politicians if there is anything that they don't quite like, and that gives them some kind of legal shield from whatever they do. There's a lot of people in the world who cannot really speak out or say anything against the system, because the powers and the structures of how everything is playing out is in a very corrupt format. And then obviously we've got emerging markets that are trying to supply these systems. A lot of the emerging markets are thinking that the world is going to re-emerge and there's going to be some kind of expansion again. But the only expansion that everybody is capable of, or the West is capable of, is more credit expansion, not actually improving the value or the production of living standards, but really just expanding the credit supply, which really gives distorted markets. It pumps up financial sectors, the housing sectors, all of the strange things that doesn't really quite improve living standards and doesn't create efficiencies and labor savings. We're not inventing the car, we're not inventing electricity, we're not doing anything. We've got some great technological innovations which are happening in Silicon Valley, but there isn't really much going on in the world of things. But one of the true amazing free market things that have been changing is the way that we look at and perceive money and Bitcoin, and how it's been really around in the market for quite some time now. It's been a few years. It's really interesting. If you think in terms of how it was pretty much downtrodden. It got down to almost 175 just before the 19th of January. It was pretty much down and out, and it reached some highs before then of around about 1,300. So it really does go through these incredible cycles of a massive pickup. Lots of people, I guess you get a scenario of people getting taken up with the frenzy, and the greed kicks in to a certain degree. People think, okay, well, if this is the money which is going to be adopted for the globe in the future, then one Bitcoin must be worth $1 million. And a lot of people can do that mathematics, but doesn't quite work out exactly how you think it is. There's definitely competitors to Bitcoin, and we're never quite sure exactly what is going to be the future for us all. But there's definitely a good shining light in terms of free market money. Whereas if you do have that paper or that plastic note in your pockets, money can be stolen from you quite easily from increasing the money supply. So therefore, if there's more money supply in circulation, your dollar is worth less, and it's a very secretive way of devaluing your money. Also, in terms of risk, you've got the interest rates. If we have a scenario where people are just paying off debts with printed money, then that gives you a massive disincentive to save money and earn interest. Therefore, that gives you a very different view and aspect of what money is. So, I'm going to pull upon some theories. Just another little note on the side that I would really restrain from going crazy into Bitcoin. Always do your homework, get independent information whenever you're investing into these things. I think Bitcoin is more so something that's really interesting on the accounting ledger. Particularly, I've gone into a number of these blockchain-ish areas in terms of ownership, how we can use self-ownership in a blockchain ledger, which can sort of alleviate a lot of the problems that we have with government. And there has been past podcasts on that. And I think this is where the amazing amount of value is perceived. If Bitcoin gets to a point of stabilization and there is literally no element of which it can be manipulated with, then we have got a very stable, good accounting, non-fiddly money supply, which we can exchange value without any worries or concerns of any foul play, which is amazing in those senses. Okay, so in terms of some theories of what's happening right now, we do have certain cycles which do occur in Bitcoin. There is a cyclical cycle of where it does really shoot up in value quite incredibly. And if we're sort of in the terms of the next cycle, we're going to potentially, and this is just being in chartist terms because it's very hard to really work out in these senses, but we're going to, if we're going on the next upsurge, so Bitcoin really needs to move past 425 and get around the 600 range for it to really start rocketing up beyond the next ceiling barrier, which will be that 1,300 range. And then you're looking at a parabolic sort of cycle of it going much higher, but we could be looking at about 3 times higher than the actual last peak, which is quite incredible. But obviously, word of caution there, don't go off going mad at this point. It's really, you really want to be looking at the fundamentals of what Bitcoin is at the moment. Also, you've got a situation of China. There's a lot more regulations which are being kicking into place in terms of flight for safety. So people are recognizing that they've had a lot of market turbulence, and the Chinese are thinking, okay, well, I need to find different routes in which I can put my money. So I'm going to put a nice investment property in New York or London, because that's always a really safe place. And I take that with a pinch of salt. And they just think of where we can put our money, which we think is the safest possible. And there are obviously some great minds there, and they're thinking, okay, well, maybe Bitcoin is one of those safe points if all is lost. If the governments do lose, because the interesting thing is obviously where you're an investor, the usual last place of safety is your government bonds. The government bonds have got the least amount of risk of failing because they can still print money supply and still pay off whoever's in debt, whoever they're in debt to. But really, if they do print money into this rapid degree and we have inflation skyrocketing in the background, which I don't think there's really much sign of it at the moment. There is certain things which kick in, especially like the price of foods and meats, but we've had drop downs in energy prices quite a lot recently. But in terms of China, they are reinvesting their money. They're trying to find safe havens, and Bitcoin is one of those things that it is the gold, it is the silver, but in the technological terms, because if governments print their money into this massive hyperinflation system, then there is this backup, which is the Bitcoin system or the blockchain. So that's incredibly interesting, and it is one of the last shields of how people can adapt to a very harsh environment. So you do have that. Then there is some other interesting elements which could occur from this. You think there's been a lot of areas where people have written about this before, about different phases of Bitcoin adoption, and we could potentially be entering into a different phase right now. So 2009, 2010, they on this report that I'm reading here, they did declare it as a experimental phase. This is the time in which there was no real value to Bitcoins. There wasn't any exchange systems, so nothing really happened at that point, but they were just playing around with the source code and seeing what was going to go on. First transaction was I think something like 1,000 Bitcoins or something on those lines for a pizza. And then it moved on from there. Maybe 1 million Bitcoins. I can't even remember. But anyway, that you can find that information on the internet for yourself. Then there was the early adoption phase, and they declared that between 2011 and 2013. So this is where you do have very, very clever investors and entrepreneurs who are seeing trends from an early stage. They're probably sort of homed into these things. There's people on the pulse of any kind of technological advancement. They're just really hot on the heels of anything, and they just kick into it and invest. But then there's really good, clever entrepreneurs. There's the Silk Road situation as well, with the drugs and the criminal worlds and the money launderers, which go into that sort of phase where they're seeing an opportunity for themselves. But yeah, there's interesting things which have occurred through that phase. And then this is a phase that we're thinking that a lot of people think they're in at the moment, where you have venture capital phases. You think of the Winklevosses, who invested a lot of money into Bitcoins and stating that they think that's the future of money. That is sort of what is claimed to be right now, this this phase between 2013 and present, and it's really sort of just that early phases of the investment grade businesses who are looking at the technology, and you're getting institutional banks and stuff like that looking at the technology. They don't really quite like the legal framework in terms of Bitcoin because it can quite easily launder money, but to meet the measurements of the government legal terms, they have to probably adopt a new form of accounting ledgers and money flowing at the same time, where you make an incredible amount of saving throughout those transactions. Next phase would be the Wall Street phase, where you do get the institutional investors, banks, broker dealers moving money, and this is incredible amounts of money into Bitcoin. So this rise in volume would be dramatic, and obviously I don't think it's too early to call if that is going to kick in right now, but you can definitely see if that sort of phase does kick in, you're going to find a potential situation where the Bitcoin is going to probably go up by threefold, I imagine. I mean, I'm just picking a bloody number out of the sky here, but if you think of the incredible amount of wealth and the greed factor which would kick in, it is an interesting phase. I'll be very interested to see if it did happen just by just people looking at the actual fundamentals of the product of Bitcoin and just investing because of that, rather than some kind of situation where people think, oh my God, the financial mechanism is about to crash, and then there was just at that point this sort of panic into Bitcoin. At that point, I would rather the first phase rather than the second phase, in terms of just people finding it interesting and investing, rather than just this panic buy straight into Bitcoin for a flight to safety. And then, so this fourth phase, I don't believe that we're in right now, but we could be on the very doorstep of it. And then the fifth and final stage would be the global customer, where you're getting the mamas and papas and granddads and grandmothers who are using Bitcoins. So it's like where you had emails, and now most people have got the email account. It would seem incredibly difficult to somebody back in, like a grandmother, to use an email account back in, say, 1994. But nowadays, let's say 50% of grandmothers use, or say an early grandmother, say somebody in 75, probably 50% do use an email account. Let's say that's in the West anyway. So it is an incredible thing to potentially see, and if there was that adoption phase, then that's incredible. Now, obviously, word of warning here, Bitcoin potentially might not be the thing that really works. There may be some alternative where there is a faster moving transaction system which comes into place. There is a little bit of a time lag in terms of transferring money. If you go down to the shops, you can do PayWave and things like that, and you do transfer the money very quickly. Bitcoin has this accounting ledger where a lot of other nodes need to confirm the transaction before it flows through. Now, I believe that there's certain upgrades which are going to deal with that over time, but for the meantime, there is certain problems with the free market currency. So it's interesting to see how that is going to work in the future. I think me personally, I don't really use Bitcoin in day-to-day transactions, but I think there is, I'll probably need some other people just to comment on this post, see how they're getting on. So yeah, with that piece of information, just keep an eye on that price now, because it's going to be very interesting. When you get this massive step rise in Bitcoin, there usually is a tremendous follow of greed and people that are looking and speculating into the price cycle. But beware, Bitcoin does have this ability to pull the plug and wash a load of people out at the same time. So there is a word of warning for you there. We may not be at the Wall Street phase just yet, and it may just be a little bit of tankering in the markets. We're not really at the phase where all the global banks are in this hyperinflation scenario where they're printing their money like it was the Weimar Republic, trying to pay off their war debts. So it's not quite there yet, but greed can do some incredible things, and just logic and people seeing the value of Bitcoin can make these interesting curves. The interesting thing is obviously people think, Bitcoin's been down and out with the Mt. Gox scenario and all those kind of things. Now, if people still hear, Bitcoin's still around and it's up on the rise again, that's really going to change the human psyche. Now it's been around for a number of years and it's still surviving out there, then that does give an incredible amount of credibility. So interesting times. Anyway, so just keep an eye on that price. I may do another update if there is some incredible news. If it just flatlines and stays pretty much at the same level as it is now, then I don't think I'll have much to talk about. But if we are on the precipice, is that the right word, before this massive peak, then let's hold on tight for the ride. So thank you very much for your time as always. If you've got any further comments, please share, and